There are 55 million people in the world right now living with dementia, and for every one of them, there is at least one family caregiver whose entire life has been reorganized around that diagnosis. Most of them are doing it without any guidance, no one telling them where to start, and just showing up every day trying to figure it out. One of the things that I learned as a caregiver is that the tools you reach for don't always work the way you think they will. Something as simple as turning on the TV can sometimes make things worse for a person with dementia. Regular TV sometimes moves too fast, the plots are too complex, and characters can cause confusion. And if the person you're caring for can't get up and leave the room, they're stuck in that chaos with nowhere to go. My guest today figured that out while caring for her husband, who was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia at 47. She needed something that didn't exist, so she built it. Her name is Allyson Schrier, and she's the co-founder and president of ZinniaTV, a streaming platform built specifically for people living with mid to late stage memory loss. No plots, no characters, or commercials. And all of the content is designed around what a brain affected by dementia can actually process. I want you to pay attention to why she built it, because she was the caregiver first, and she sat where a lot of you are sitting right now. And she came out of it believing that even in the latest stages of this disease, connection is still possible. You just have to find the right way in. I hope you enjoy this episode. So you built Zinnia because your husband had dementia and what you needed didn't actually exist. Can you take me to the moment that you decided to build the company and not just cope with what was going on?
It didn't originally start as Zinnia, right? It started off as a way for me to try and figure out better ways to connect and communicate with my husband. So frontotemporal dementia, diagnosed at the age of 47. Eventually he moved into long-term care. And what I found is that our conversations were growing increasingly transactional and meaningless. So I would just show up to visit him and talk about the price of peaches, or what a hassle it was with traffic today. And I had done some study. At this point, I was already trying to figure out, what's my job going to be? Because I'm going to need a job at some point. And maybe my job, I used to do education. Maybe I could do some kind of dementia education. So I had started studying under Teepa Snow. And one of her lessons was this idea of visual verbal touch, which is the idea that people hang on to the ability people connect visually with things more than they connect with other senses as dementia progresses. And so I thought, maybe we could have more meaningful conversations if there was a visual component. And so that's kind of where things started, is that I would then bring things in, like what happens if I give you a hockey glove? Or what happens if I give you, we flip through a hockey magazine, or I bring in your kayak paddle. I mean, if I bring in things that are meaningful to you, and we can then tell stories about that thing, and it worked. So one of the things that we would look at, of course, were photos. And by that time I had an iPhone with lots of photos on it. And so we'd go through the photos. And then I realized that with my iPhone, I could actually make little videos. And so we would sit together and we'd watch these little videos, and the videos, it was no work on my part. I would tell it to make a video of dogs. And so it would stitch together a little video of all of the pictures of dogs on my phone, set it to music. We could watch it together. We could talk about what we were looking at, which is completely contrary to the experience at that time when he was in front of a TV. He would just kind of seize up and get really frustrated when he was in front of a TV. And yet these little videos were working. And so I thought, I would like to create little videos like this of hikes in the Pacific Northwest, or of kayaking or hockey, but I don't have pictures like that on my phone. So I wound up, my background, by the way, is in technology before I stopped to have children and follow that path, right? And so I reached back to some of my tech buds and I said, hey, who do we know who had something to do with this Apple product that I'm using? Because I need to figure out how to get more content on my phone. Because if I have pictures of hockey and I have pictures of hiking and kayaking, I can then make little videos of it. And the guy I wound up getting routed to, I just called him out of the blue. I'm like, hey, so glad David introduced me to you. So here's what I'm doing. Here's who I am. And he was like, wait a minute, you're making these little videos to support a person living with dementia? And I said, yeah. And he said, oh my God. And he said, okay, so do you know what I did on this product? I was the designer. And I was like, wow, okay. And he said, I totally get what you're doing. And we never, ever had that as a use case. What if we made this product so that it could appeal to people who needed a slowed down viewing experience? And so he was like, you don't need content on your phone. We need to build something. So he had recently left Apple. He lived in Vancouver, BC. I'm in Seattle. So the next weekend I drove up there. We met and we were like, let's do this. So that is where Zinnia came from.
That's beautiful. And you seem very solution oriented. I see a lot of our founder, Shauna Sweeney, in you, and you're always looking for the solution, and you talk about it so eloquently. However, during the transition of you trying to figure out the solution for your husband, was it difficult for you to put on a founder hat and sort of let go of the wife role? Or did you never really let go of the wife role for your husband?
So no, I never let go of the wife role. And the founder role was really something that I went into kind of kicking and screaming. So I was interested in the product, right? I was interested in the content. So very early on, I mentioned that my thought was, well, gosh, maybe I could become a dementia educator. Maybe that would be my job, because like my tech experience is so old, nobody's going to want me to be there to work in that area. So got deeply involved. Even while this Zinnia thing was percolating, I pursued this idea of doing dementia education, wound up at the University of Washington, where I helped launch and then managed a program that was online education, but for doctors to figure out how to be better equipped to detect, diagnose, and support people with dementia. So I loved it. I was still in the wife role, loved it, and still had this Zinnia idea. And I thought, if we build content, we need to make sure it works. Like if it works on my husband. So I was working with Frank, working with the designer. We started building content. Through my job at the University of Washington, I had met some people at the University of British Columbia who had a learning lab where they tested products for people with dementia. Wound up connecting with a guy, a philanthropist who loved what we were doing. And unbelievably, so much of success of any kind is about serendipity, right? And luck. He loved what we were doing, and he offered to fund research at the University of British Columbia. So for the first 2 years, we were just like making videos. I'd go to long-term care communities. I'd go to people's homes. We had researchers at UBC who agreed to do a 2-year project because our donated funds were matched by Canadian governmental funds. And so for 2 years, Zinnia was being used in long-term care communities and in a hospital. And all I was about was the product. Like, are we doing it? Are we creating the thing that we wanted to create? Around the time that we finally had the content solid and we had built a delivery mechanism, I was still working at the University of Washington, which was it was a half-time job. And I was also teaching in long-term care communities. So Zinnia was like happening. Other people on the team were building, the researchers were testing. And then we wound up getting into the Techstars Future of Longevity Accelerator, which had been such a long shot. We'd been turned down once. And then because by the way, we'd added Bill Uniowski to the team, who's the biz guy, right? And Bill was like, we need to get into an accelerator program. And we were put on a waiting list for a cohort that was starting on January 6th. On January 3rd, they called me and they were like, hey, guess what? You can do this, but you need to be here in like 2 days and stay here for 2 weeks. Can you do it? And I'm a very yes and person. And so I said, yes. And then I reached out to my bosses at the UW and I'm like, you guys, I got to do this. I got to do this thing. I got to leave town for 2 weeks. So I went to Washington, D.C. to do it. And it was like CEO boot camp. And it just totally kicked my butt. And it made me realize like, whoa, this is like, we're actually building a company here. Like we need to figure out how do you do a company? And it was at that program that the guy who was the managing director said, look, I know you love what you're doing at the University of Washington and you love teaching and you're all about like, how do we help people with dementia? And he said, but the best way you can help people with dementia is to get your product out there. Mm-hmm. And here's the deal. If you give this Zinnia thing everything you've got, there's a chance that you'll succeed. If you give it anything less than everything that you've got, there's no chance it will succeed. So I was like, okay, all right. So I went back to my bosses at the UW and I said, I'm going to be leaving in 6 months. So gave them 6 months while I tried to figure out with Bill. I mean, Bill is the CEO. At the time I was the CEO. Once we went to that thing, I'm like, I can't be the CEO. You need to be the CEO. And I became the president. And so that's kind of how like the genesis of how Zinnia became Zinnia and how I went from being a person who thought it'd be really cool to make videos to being the person who is running a company that does that.
And how has the company evolved over time where you talk about we just started by wanting to create videos and now years later, how has the company evolved and what do you offer to caregivers now if it's not any different than what you started with?
It is different than we've started with. So one of the things, Chris, out of the gate that was amazing is that you create a product and you're pretty sure how people will use the product and you're pretty sure about what the benefits of the product are. But what we discovered is that just like with Frank, when I was like, hey, I'm a housewife who's making videos to support a person with dementia, and he was like, what? It's the same thing with Zinnia videos. People be like, oh, yeah, we use it for this. And I'm like, what? We never thought about that. So we need to lean more into that and like celebrate that. So we have continued to evolve in terms of what kind of content we build and what we're trying to do with it. And one of the things that we have done most recently over the last couple of years is like, I hate to be like we use AI because like who doesn't use AI these days? But it turns out that there are certain types of content that we can build using AI that allow us to build broad categories of content to accomplish very specific tasks. Like we now have quiz content, which instead of working for people the way that the rest of the content does. So let me back up there for a second. So what are Zinnia's main use cases, right? We've now done lots of research and we've been in a bunch of accelerator programs and we've been at universities doing research and we've been in hospitals and we have been done pilots with large long-term care communities and we are in many, many people's homes. And what we figured out is the same things happen over and over and over again when people use ZinniaTV. One is that it actually helps build connection and conversation, right? The thing I was talking about at the beginning. It's a lot easier to have a conversation about something if we're both looking at it and if it means something to us. So that's one thing. And in long-term care settings, it's great to promote conversation between staff and people with dementia, but also people with dementia and other people with dementia. So it enhances sociability and interactivity, right? That's one thing. Another thing is that Zinnia has proven to be a great tool to reduce and soothe agitation. And there are even people who use Zinnia as a first step to try and avoid the use of antipsychotics. And that's an example of something that we were like, what? It does that? And that was because somebody approached me at a conference. She was like, let me tell you how we're using the babies video to prevent the use of antipsychotics for this woman who used to be a pediatric nurse. And we were like, of course it does. But it's been proven out in research over and over again. And then one of the things that that was aha, you know what we could do with this, which has worked really well, is that we created content to help with activities of daily living. So as a caregiver, I know that there are certain things, even something like drinking a glass of water, right? I can go to my 89-year-old mom and say, hey, mom, it's about time to drink some water. And there's every possibility that mom will say, I'm 89 years old. I don't need you to tell me when I need water. Or she might say, I just had a glass of water when she didn't. So instead, we have a video called Let's Drink Water. And it's just people drinking water. It's dogs drinking water. It's kitty cats drinking water. We have let's take a shower. Let's use the toilet. And the idea is that these videos model the thing that we're about to do so that you feel safer and more incentivized to want to do it. So that's our body of video content accomplishes those kinds of things. And then any of our videos can be used to promote activities. Like if we're going to go out for a walk, let's watch a dog video first. And then when we go for our walk, we can see how many dogs we can count. So use it as a mechanism to get us out of the house, right? Or even a gardening video, we can pause and talk about what are they planting. So lots of that kind of activity. Or if we're going to be doing a thing where we're planting little like sunflower seeds in cups, let's watch a flower video first. But to return to what I was saying previously about the AI stuff, I wanted to have there be content that is easy for anybody to turn into an activity. So like we have sing-alongs, right? Those are an activity. We have Faith Channel, which has prayers. Those are an activity that you can do together. But with the quizzes, it causes some critical thinking. It causes people to try and figure things out. And we tested these quizzes. We were very, very lucky to get funding to test these quizzes in both assisted living and memory care in Massachusetts. And in assisted living, they bombed. The assisted living people were like, these are so easy. Right? The answer is on the screen. But in memory care, they were a hit. People were like, Tom Sawyer, because it says on the screen, Tom Sawyer. And everybody's like, whoa, you got it. And they're like, I got it. And so we've taken that experience of helping people have sort of these dopamine hits from like, I got something right. I'm the person in charge right now, which is so rare for people who are living with dementia. So now we just are coming out with new content that's called Discover and Discuss. That is sort of documentaries, because people can still learn, right? When people have dementia, they're losing neurons, but they're also still able to build neurons. So why don't we try to help people learn new things, give them new things to talk about? So they're sort of like mini documentaries, because also the intention with Zinnia is that there's no plot, because plot can be very confusing for people who can't remember which character is which. And wait, is he the one who? However, when people are earlier on in their progression, they still enjoy a plot. And so we wanted to have some things that at least have a very clear flow, even if there's not necessarily a plot. And then we also recently came out, when I was visiting my husband, it would drive me nuts that at some point in the day, somebody would stand up, one of the staff would stand up, room full of people with dementia, and she'd take out her printout and she'd say, on this day in history in 1842, and then she'd talk about what happened, and you could see everybody is like, looking all over the place. And so we created a video. We have 365 videos this day in history, where it is 10 to 12 things where there's a beautiful image that pops up on the screen, because that visual connection is so important. And then a very slowed down low register, because higher registers are harder for people with hearing loss to hear. With a low register, somebody talks about what happened this day in history and then provides one more little fact about whatever that was. So those have been a big hit.
I'm curious about the content that you guys create. You've spoken a little bit about one, not having a very clear plot. I thought that was very interesting. You talk about the low register. Are there any other things on your guys' checklist before creating content that you know that you have to hit to make sure that you get the experience that you're looking for on the other side of watching something on Zinnia?
Yeah, that the visuals have to be really engaging. Like, it needs to be pretty clear what we're looking at. We do have some travel videos where it will show like a screen of downtown Paris. And those are hard. Like, you want to show Paris because there are some people who will see it and say, oh, that's Paris. And there are other people who will be like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be looking at here. Right. So a lot of it, we generally try to have something that's pretty clear visual. Can I share a story with you really quickly?
Sure, I would love to hear it.
Okay. So last year, I presented at a conference at the Michigan Assisted Living Association. I led a panel, and the title of the panel's discussion was Low Tech and No Tech Solutions for People Who Are Living with Dementia. So the audience is like, I don't know, 200 or 300 people, and they're all people like me. And you get this too, people who are caregivers. Some of them professional, mostly family caregivers. The panelists all had dementia. So I'm up there with 7 people who are living with dementia. And I started off my talk by asking the question, what do you guys, panelists, like to watch on TV these days? And Chris, all but one of them, said the same thing, which was, I don't watch TV. I can't, because I find that I'm going to time out here for a second, pause. What happens to a brain when it's living with dementia? Processing speed is hammered. It's much more difficult to take in all sensory data. We know that when people have even the earliest stages of dementia, that they're still going to miss like 1 in every 3 or 4 words that's spoken. So trying to understand, like I'm trying to still parse word 3 and you're on word 5 and then I'm lost and now I'm trying to jump in. So it's really hard. People have to stay so focused to follow a conversation. So think about TV where you've got audio that's coming in at a normal speed, like you and I are chatting right now. And you've got visuals that are coming in that are moving at a normal speed. And so for a person with dementia, trying to process both of those results in what these panelists described. It feels like chaos inside of me. I can't follow it. And I drive my husband crazy. Wait, is she the one wait, whose mother is that? I can't keep track of the plot. I can't follow the characters. And so therefore, if I walk into a room and a TV is playing, I leave, or I turn the TV off and I never turn the TV on. So, and again, they describe just this sort of like the high anxiety that they feel. So bear in mind, these are all people who are living with dementia and they were able to get their bodies to Michigan to be on a panel. So we know that there are people who fall into that category of folks who, if you were having a conversation with them, it would be a minute before you figured out that there's something not quite right. So what is it like then for people who are much more progressed? And so this is where I think about when I would show up at the long-term care community and my husband was literally parked in a wheelchair in front of a television and he might be pounding on his chest or he might be screaming out swear words or his eyes would be clenched shut. And I think about what they described, the chaos going on inside their body that, and they're able, I turn the TV off or I leave the room. Well, what if you're in a wheelchair and you're nonverbal, right? Those aren't options. So you are parked in front of something that is making your lived experience miserable and there's nothing that you can do about it. So this is why we don't have a plot. We don't have characters. We don't have dialogue, except in very rare categories of content that are completely avoidable if people don't want to watch those. So those are the ways that we, like, what does dementia-friendly TV look like? And so people are like, well, so they can't watch TV anymore at all? No, I mean, I hear from people all the time who are like, my mom is crazy about Golden Girls. Then watch Golden Girls, right? Or another lady who's like, my mom, I have a question for you. This came up at a lecture I did. My mom really, really likes Gunsmoke. And so we watch Gunsmoke and it makes her really happy. But lately, every time a gun goes off, she gets really upset. Should we stop watching Gunsmoke? And I'm like, it's Gunsmoke. There are going to be guns that go off. If it's upsetting, it's probably time to stop watching that. So it's not that you can't watch TV if you have dementia, but for the caregiver, you need to just pay attention. So, yeah. Anyway, so Zinnia is commercial free. A lot of people use it to like set the tone. Maybe in the afternoon, they put on some nature videos to just sort of like calm things down a little bit for both themselves and the person who they support. So we call it a caregiver tool, right? Because our thesis is, if he's happy, I'm happy.
I love that. Has there been a universal hit among long-term care communities or within family caregivers who are caring for somebody at home? What has been the number one hit type of content, something that's a visual, a sound for mostly everybody experiencing Zinnia?
I will say that probably our most watched videos are our babies videos. Babies and nature, things like puppies and kittens. And I know people will be like, I don't need to get Zinnia. I can go to YouTube and watch puppies. And you can. And if you can monitor it, then go for it. But you kind of never know what's coming next. But I think that there is a general appeal to these things that are cute, things that are inoffensive. Certainly, if somebody doesn't like dogs, they're probably not going to love the dogs video or the puppies video. But I find that when I go someplace, if I'm in a room, like just last week, I did a training. There happened to be a long-term care community right here in West Seattle, where I live. And I said, I'll walk over and do a training. And we watched a few different things, but I put the babies video on, and it's this room full of women who all have had babies, right? And they're all like, oh, it's perceptible. There's just the, ooh. So I would say that videos, anything that is familiar. So it could be babies, right? As mentioned, like they probably most of them had babies. But you know what? if you're with, there was a story a caregiver shared with me. She worked in long-term care, and there was a father and son who were visiting mom. Mom is nonverbal. They try a couple of different videos. They're like, ZinniaTV doesn't work. Mom doesn't. She just keeps her eyes closed. And she asked them, well, is there anything what was her hobby? And they said, oh, sewing. I mean, she was a crazy sewer. And she was like, well, let's see if there's a sewing video. So they put the sewing video on. And she just sat there, like leaning back with her eyes closed until there was the sound of scissors cutting fabric. And then she opened her eyes. She watched the whole thing. And at the end, nonverbal mom started talking about sewing. So I think that what I love about ZinniaTV is that it is an unlock. It's a way to find your way in to what could potentially help a person come out.
If a caregiver right now is listening and is about to use Zinnia for the first time, what does onboarding look like for a family? How do they know exactly what to play, what cues to look for, what types of content? Is there general content that they should play first to get a feel for what my person would like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And here's how we've tried to address that. So we have a for caregivers area. And in that, we have videos about how to watch Zinnia. And one of them is called What to Watch. And What to Watch is just basically like 30-second clips from a bunch of different videos. And the idea is that you could kind of watch that with someone and then see what sparks them. But we also have videos that talk about how to use Zinnia as a tool to promote connection and conversation, how to use Zinnia to do activities, how to use Zinnia to promote adherence to activities of daily living, how to use Zinnia to soothe and reduce agitation. But I think that in many ways, Chris, it's a lot like, well, okay, so we have this subscription to Netflix. Like, what do we watch? I don't know, whatever you watch. You know, there are plenty of people who say that they act. So each of the channels, for each of the titles of video, there's an icon. And so some people will look at them with the person with dementia and they watch to see, like the interest channel is all over the place. There's baking and there's baseball and there's basketball and there's skiing. And because the idea is, what's the thing? Like it's like more like hobbies. What is it that your person is interested in? But things like animal videos, nature videos, I talk to people who have never gone beyond those channels. And I think,
interesting.
What? There's so much more.
I do love nature, so I can relate to that a lot.
Yeah.
Question for you: earlier on in your caregiving journey for your husband, was there anything that you heavily struggled with that you overcame, and what helped you overcome that?
So my husband had frontotemporal dementia, behavioral variant, and my kids were 12 and 15 when he was diagnosed. And it took us 6 years to get a diagnosis. So there were many years where my husband's behaviors were getting, and I hate to use the word behavior, the way that my husband responded to the world was wildly inappropriate by most people's standards. And he would say and do things that were deeply troubling. And I would respond by being deeply troubled. I would get angry. And aghast, shame, like, what are you thinking? Why would you do something like that? Because I didn't know, right? I didn't know that he had dementia. I just thought that he was, he'd been diagnosed with ADHD. And I was like, you are the only person with ADHD who does things like this. Like, what are you doing? Once we got his diagnosis, the thing that I tell people is that like every bit of anger that was in me, it was like, whoop, it all came out and it was replaced with sadness. Like, okay, I get it. The earliest and best education that I got was in how to respond to those times when the person is doing or saying things that are challenging to me as the caregiver, is to recognize that one of us needs to change and it's not going to be him. And so if one of us needs to change, it's got to be me. And how do I change my responses to a way that lowers the anxiety and the energy instead of amplifying it? And I think that that is the thing. And it's not just for people living with dementia, right? So I mentioned I did dementia education for 4 years. I was in long-term care communities teaching Washington State's mandated dementia education and mental health classes, full-day classes, each of them. And of course, there's much overlap there. Just the way, how do you handle a person in distress? How do you respond to a person in distress? Why is it that when you dial 911, the people who show up at your house are called first responders and not first reactors? Like, what's the difference between those two? And how do you train yourself to be a person who responds instead of reacting? I think that is like the earliest on thing that I learned that made a huge difference in how I was able to kind of get through stuff.
That's really interesting. I never thought about the word choice for first responders. It is not first reactors, it is first responders. And I can only imagine how much chaos there would be in a home if we were having first reactors come to the house.
Exactly.
If you had to think about the moment that you decided to get your husband tested or diagnosed, what things, I know you said he displayed some behaviors or reactions that weren't favorable, but what exactly were you seeing? Because maybe there are people out there who are unsure if they should get their loved one diagnosed or not.
Yeah. FTD, of course, is a pretty different thing than Alzheimer's disease. Early, so in that 6-year period, early on, he was still working as a software engineer, and he would make mistakes that would be pointed out to him. And he was like, I can't believe I didn't see that. Like, how did I not see that? That is such a rookie mistake. And so he recognized that he was making mistakes, like by just not being able to see the mistakes. So that is what caused him to see somebody and wound up getting this incorrect diagnosis. But for me, the personality change, right? So with FTD, behavioral variant, what you start noticing is that the person changes. So remember what's happening, or maybe for people who don't know, right, who are listening, with FTD, it's frontotemporal dementia. So it's the frontal lobe, which is executive function. And so therefore, if somebody starts to lose executive function, what do they start behaving like? Well, somebody whose executive function is not fully developed, like a teenage boy. And that is what my husband started being in the world, was his way of responding to me, his way of responding to situations. It was like he was 17, 14. And it would drive me crazy. Like, we need to go, hey, we've got to go get this thing done in the yard today, and he'd be like, yeah, I don't really want to do that. What do you mean you don't want to do it? We have to do it. If you think we have to do it, you do it. What? So this sort of non-responsiveness, irresponsibility, very narcissistic kind of behavior that was not normal. And so I think that I recognize, like, there is something that's not right here, but it's hard to pinpoint why is it not right. And I think that the message for everybody, whether it's something that's happening mentally, psychosocially, or physically, if there is something that's not the way that it used to be, it's worth investigating. It's worth getting curious about. And so those things started getting more and more unusual. Like, I would leave him with the kids when I went out to book club, say, and I'd come home, and instead of being bed, they'd all be sitting in his office watching porn. Like, okay, that's probably not okay, because they're like 8 and 10. What are you thinking? Oh my God. Like, stuff like that I couldn't leave him alone with them because I just didn't know where, like, what are you going to do? So yeah, kind of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And what does the conversation sound like when you are encouraging him to get diagnosed or get tested?
Well, this is something that a lot of people ask about, is how do you encourage somebody to get tested? In his case, he was interested in getting tested. He knew that there was something that wasn't right. And he wanted to be, even though he wasn't sometimes seemingly aware in the moment that he was doing something that was didn't make sense, afterwards, he would be able to tell that was something that hadn't made sense. So he was interested in getting help. What I often, the conversation I have with other families, though, is that if a person says, there's nothing wrong with me, there's nothing wrong with me, you're the problem. You know what? I guess we should probably both get tested. Oh my gosh. Thank you for pointing that out to me. Yeah, let's both get tested. And would you support me if it turns out there is something that's not quite right with me? So most people still want to help other people. And so if I make it so that I'm the one who's having issues, sometimes I can get the person to support me. The other thing that we can do is, everybody's supposed to be getting an annual Medicare exam, right? That tests cognition. So yeah, I think that having it be about there is something wrong with you and you need to get tested is just an approach that very, very rarely works. I think that it needs to be kind of normalized, that this is something that everybody our age is doing. So let's go ahead and do it. And if nothing else, you know what? We'll learn from the experience of whatever it is that they do in these tests. And then we can help our friends who probably need testing. So there are lots of different ways to approach that I think that are less offensive.
Yeah, I ask that because I live with family. I have parents, and I feel like our personalities are constantly changing. And sometimes I'll walk into a room and I'll be like, this is not who you are. And I don't know if that's a sign of dementia, or is that just us being like humans being humans? And I guess that could be solved with a yearly test, right? Of how's your capacity doing?
So what you're describing, everybody has bad days, right? But we're looking for consistency. We're looking for the fact that mom used to, in the afternoons, go in and like every afternoon she would, I don't know, maybe start cooking dinner or something. But now I see that when it's time to start cooking dinner, that she's getting agitated and she's snapping at me. Well, why is that? Like, if that becomes a pattern, then it's something that we need to look at. Like, why is that happening? And then maybe we need to figure something out. I encourage people to, if they're open to it, that there are little tests that we can do. Certainly there are things online that you can do that kind of give you a sense. I think that most doctors would probably recoil if they hear me suggesting something like that. But even something like every 6 months, I think that when people of a certain age should once a year do some little things and track how they do over time. Like how many, in 1 minute, how many animal names can I write down? If I was able to write down and stay focused, right? If I was able to write down 35, and then the next year I'm able to write down 32, and then the next year I'm able to write 35 again, and then suddenly it's at 17, and then I'm at 12, like it's right there. I can see that there are things that are changing that I want to pay attention to. I think the best thing that family members can do is to just get curious, notice, ask yourselves, like, what else is going on? Could it be that maybe there's somebody in their lives who's having a difficult time and they're internalizing it and it's showing up as anxiety? There's just so many different things that could be going on.
You sound very passionate about dementia and helping other caregivers. And you spoke earlier about how difficult it possibly could be to be a CEO of a company. What makes you come back to doing this every day?
Because I so believe in the work that we do. It's the testimonials. We get testimonials from people with things like, thank you for giving me my wife back. Or a caregiver who says, I used to live in a state of constant high anxiety because she would get to this place every day. But now I know that if I put this particular video on, that it grabs her attention and she calms down. So it's like, I've got something in my back pocket that's going to save us both from that level of anxiety. And stories like people who will talk about a quiz that they showed somebody who is nonverbal and the person is shouting out the answers. I really believe in the power of Zinnia to be able to not just bring peaceful moments, joyful moments, moments of autonomy to people who are living with dementia, but also I was a caregiver, and I know you know what I'm talking about. The having the very, very early on, I was shown statistics about what happens to caregivers, right? That caregivers, it's not unusual that the caregiver winds up getting quite ill or worse because of the stress of caregiving. Levels of dementia are higher in people who have been dementia caregivers than the average population because of that stress, because of the fact that we're not paying attention to our own care because we're so focused on the other person's care. And so I love us family caregivers. And I love that there's something that I can do that can potentially help them have a less stressful experience. So that's honestly what drives me. It's not the money. I like, full disclosure, I don't take a salary. I do this because I really believe in what I'm doing. And one day, maybe if Zinnia, we're slow and steady, our growth, I love it. There are all kinds of exciting irons in the fire. And maybe there will come a day when it's easy for me to take a salary as well. But right now, we have an NIH grant that we have as funding research right now that we're doing with Duke. And I'm forced to take some salary from that. I actually use that money to pay for some content building because that's just where I am. And of course, obviously I have some money set aside that allows me to take salary, but it's not like I'm living really high on the hog. But I guess my point is just to say that I do this because I believe in it and I do it because I love it. And there are plenty of people like me who are doing things because they want to help other people who live in the dementia sphere.
If you had to think about the future of Zinnia and the things that you guys are working on internally right now, if you get them right, what does the landscape of care, in dementia care specifically, what does it look like, and with the use of Zinnia?
Looks like people having hope that there are tools that they can use to enhance the quality of life for both themselves and their loved one with dementia. I think that when I talk to people who've never heard of Zinnia before, that's the first sense that I get from them is like, wait a minute, what? There are actually things that I can do that can make this a little bit of a better experience for all of us. We intentionally keep Zinnia's price point really low. So for family caregivers, it's $69 a year or $9.99 a month. Because our play is not that like, let's sell 100 of these and make $1 million, right? The thing is like, how do we get Zinnia to everybody's home? How do we make it so that and it's not like it works for everybody. It won't work for everybody, but how do we get people to at least try it to see whether or not it helps them? That's what we're all about.
Is there something that you guys are currently working on, like a product or research that you guys are doing, or something that's in the pipeline that you are super excited about and can't wait for it to come out?
There's a group of researchers so I mentioned that we're doing this NIH funded research at Duke, and that is looking at some potential enhancements to Zinnia that I'm excited about. But aside from that, there's another project going on at Duke that is not funded, and that's within the VA. And at the VA, they are doing testing to look at Zinnia as a tool to help prevent and alleviate post-surgical delirium. And for me, that is, God, would I ever love it if it turns out that we're actually able to help in that way. So my husband had FTD, but my stepfather had vascular dementia, and my stepmom had what undiagnosed, but it behaved a lot like Alzheimer's disease. She wound up having a surgery, and nobody had talked to my dad about the possibility that, by the way, she's older. Nobody mentioned the fact that, and her memory is not the best, but nobody told him she might be different after the surgery. Post-surgical delirium is a big problem. And boy, was she different. It was like a game of chutes and ladders. And she had just gone whoop right down the dementia slide. And, dementia is a slow moving disease, right? But if you get post-surgical delirium, it's like it just skips you, 5 blocks down the dementia lane. And so if there's any way that we could help with that kind of prevention, boy, that would be exciting.
Yeah.
And
I
then
think
the
that's
other thing,
beautiful.
another thing, frankly, that I'm really excited about is more and more I hear from people who are using Zinnia to support people with other kinds of differences, right? Like people who use it with their kids who are on the autism spectrum, who find that Zinnia videos are really soothing and help them get their activities done. I love that we can potentially help a broader population. And we have talked at different times about how cool it would be to actually like move in that direction, but we're just not big enough right now to try and take things in that direction. But it's someplace I'd like to go.
So excited to keep up with how Zinnia does and how you guys excel and how you guys continue to progress. I think your story is extremely fascinating, and I appreciate you so much for taking the time to sit with me and chat.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I can get a bit long-winded at times, so I hope I didn't take us in too many of the wrong directions, but I so appreciate what you do. And I'm grateful to you for having given me this opportunity to talk about Zinnia.